I'm a Labour member, and I'm from North West Durham, which of course was last held by Lord Pidcock and is now held by a Conservative MP after 2019, and a very nasty Conservative MP as well. In terms of the Red Wall, as you've kind of alluded to in your introduction, Dave, it's quite a controversial term. Now, I'm not really a massive fan of the term Red Wall. There are clear distinctions and local nuances across traditional Labour heartland, so it's not a one-size-fits-all type of thing. But that being said, I would consider the Red Wall, for the purpose of this discussion, a series of northern constituencies who have traditionally voted Labour, who are traditionally working class, and who often have a trade union tradition. And sometimes it includes parts of the Midlands and North Wales as well. So in terms of where we're at now, I think we need to start with a bit of perspective and realise how we got to the situation where we're at. I think we need to consider that since 1997, the Labour Party has lost seats at every general election with one exception. And of course, that exception was 2017. So the anomaly in terms of losing seats and the vote share for Labour was 2017, not 2019. So in a period of quarter of a century, we've seen a steady decline of people voting Labour across Britain and in its traditional heartlands. And whilst there'll be many factors that you could put this down to, I would contend it's partly down to growing inequality during the new Labour years. It's down to local councils in the north who are just ineffective, who have managed austerity. And it's down as well to the fact that there's a cigarette paper's worth of difference between the two main political parties, or that there have been, with the exception of 2015 to 19, that being Labour and the Tories. And during this period, and stuff which you can't put at Corbyn's feet, was the SNP taking over Scotland. This wasn't Corbyn, this wasn't Brexit, this was down to New Labour and the neoliberal policies which they put forward. So we've been losing seats consistently for 25 years. But that being said, there was a considerable and noticeable net loss of 47 seats in 2019. These seats largely in Brexit voting areas, largely in Red Wall seats. And for those of us who campaigned up here during that period, we know what the issue was, which cost us those seats. And that issue was primarily Brexit. And I don't want to open up a Brexit discourse, because that isn't the subject of this discussion. But it would be remiss of me not to acknowledge its impact and also say that the left really messed up their position on this. And there's a tendency now in 2022 to reinvent history. You would think that the left understood what a nonsense position the Labour Party had in 2019, but it didn't. And large swathes of people ran with this undemocratic idea of a people's vote. And I think the idea that 17.4 million people were ignored highlights a feeling a lot of northern voters have, of all political persuasions, that Westminster doesn't listen. And in some sense, this typifies a kind of long-held prejudices people have about people in the north who were a bit stupid, slightly racist, and when things go wrong, the backlash to this was felt in 2019 on the doorstep in the exit poll. So the feeling that Red Wall seats had been left behind was utterly compounded by the decision from the Labour Party to pursue that second referendum. And, at risk of stating the obvious, the only substantive difference with regards to the Labour position between 17 and 19, 17 where we had record gain of seats, 19 where we had a record loss of seats, was the Brexit position. That's the only substantive difference. And this disenfranchisement was undoubtedly the primary reason why the Red Wall turned its back on the Labour Party. So just to give a bit of context, so where are we now and where are we going? So whilst, politics is always difficult to predict, because who would have predicted Corbyn, who would have predicted Trump, who would have predicted Brexit? So these things are difficult to predict. But, we do have some precedents in regards to where we're going with Red Wall seats. We do have some data, and this data is the by-elections and local elections which have taken place since Labour lost those seats in 2019. So the obvious context for these seats are that the Labour Party now has a new leader in Starmer. We don't really have any policies, which I'm aware of, other than he's not Jeremy Corbyn and he's not the Conservative Party. So that's the context heading into these red wall seats, and the first of which was the Hartlepool by-election, and the local council elections on May the 6th, 2021. As you'll know, we lost the Hartlepool by-election and over 300 council seats at that time. The Labour vote falling in the by-election from under Corbyn, 15,464 to 8,589, which meant councils like Durham County Council, where I'm at, fell to the Tories for the first time in over 100 years. And the Hartlepool by-election, I think it's fair to say, took place with a parachuted right-wing candidate and no substantive policy platform. And let's not forget, the timing of this was after the almost criminal inaction and incompetence by the Tory over COVID, which ultimately resulted in the unnecessary deaths of thousands of people. So that was the context and that was the outcome. So following that disaster at Hartlepool and the local elections of that year, another seat which came up, which would be considered a red wall seat shortly after, was Batley and Spen, which saw a 3,000 majority go down to a 300 majority, with Labour's vote dropping from 22,594 to 13,296. Now, I think it should be noted that by-elections, the turnout's generally lower than you would get in a general election, but it would also be fair to point out that the opposition parties generally do better in by-elections than we do in general elections. So that was another poor result in the Labour heartland. And the following set of elections were the locals this year just gone, and they were also interesting. And bizarrely, despite appalling results the previous year, the party went with a platform of having no policies yet again, other than they're not Boris Johnson and they haven't been mired in a scandal at Downing Street. So there couldn't be a more opportune moment for Labour to recapture these seats or reclaim seats and reclaim councils they've lost. Tory government in disarray. And there were modest gains for Labour in the Red Wall, most notably Cumberland, which is my old stomping ground. But the party lost seats in places like Hull and Barnsley and Sheffield. It was once again a bad night for the Labour Party. The Conservatives had a worse night. However, the third parties picked up the majority of the seats lost by the Conservatives. We've got to remember that these elections happened under a relatively good time for Labour, and yet we still failed to make any substantive ground. Over the last 3 years, we've had no policy position to speak of, no leadership, hemorrhaging of members, either by choice or through expulsion, a lack of funding in the party for various reasons. And we've performed very badly in the majority of elections we've taken part in. We see a continuation of hand-picked and imposed right-wing candidates, and some of the candidates now, which have already been selected for the next general election, are abysmal. And I'm thinking about candidates just down the road from me in Bishop Auckland, a guy called Sam Rushton. If you want to depress yourself, go and have a look at him online. Oliver Ryan in Burnley, just vacuous right-wing candidates who offer absolutely nothing to their respective constituencies. So the realist in me asks myself, why would we expect anything different to happen in our red wall seats at the next general election? So, I think it was Einstein. I should have Googled this before I put the quote down in my notes. But insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And that's what the Labour Party is doing right now. It's doing the same thing again and again. We've added 3 years of shite in terms of results in the red wall, and we're going to carry on with this same position. It's absolute insanity. And I'm sorry, because I know this isn't the most optimistic and positive of lead-offs, but I think it's fair to be. I should be realistic as well. So moving forward, I'm going to speak about Starmer in a minute, but I want to emphasise the kind of scale of the problems we've got in regards to poverty and deprivation in our red wall seats. Taking the North East as an example, it has the highest poverty rate in England. 2 in 5 children in the North East are growing up in poverty. Nearly half the children in the North East are in poverty. 41% of children of key workers in the North East are living in poverty. These key workers who risk their lives to keep the country going. Vote stats from the Northern TUC from the last week, by the way. RPI is going to be running at 13-14%. Energy prices trebling. We've got an incoming recession. And let's be completely clear about this. People will die. And it will be the poorest people and the most vulnerable people who will die. This is a matter of life and death. So the problem the Labour Party has, in my view, is that the policies which would solve this incoming recession and long-term financial issues we've got, the policies that would solve this are socialist. And they don't want to touch socialism with a barge pole. And I have this argument with comrades quite often, and I always say that they say that the current leadership aren't ideological, they're vacuous, they don't have any policies, blah blah blah. But I think they are ideological in the sense that they won't give an inch to any socialist policies. It's my belief that they would rather die on their sword than win from the left. In terms of people in the Red Wall, in terms of their aspirations, they're no different to any working class man or woman anywhere else in the country. People want dignity at work. They want to be able to get a doctor's appointment. They want a pension they can live on. They want wages they can live on. And they want what everyone wants, rich, poor, old, young, whatever. They want to be able to enjoy their lives. These aren't revolutionary aspirations. Where are we now in regards to what Starmer's doing? So we've got this impending crisis, and it's my belief that what the Labour Party should be doing is calling a state of emergency and offer a series of proposals to limit and stop this imminent catastrophe. And following that, a series of policies which will ensure that this does not take place again. Things like corporation tax, wealth tax, renationalisation of energies, of transport, etc., etc. And he's not doing that. So what he's shown himself to be is not only morally bankrupt and a liar and tactically inept, he's also misread the mood of the workers and the voters. And Starmer is essentially doing a very bad New Labour Tribute Act. And the problem for him is that, the material conditions of the mid-90s are not the material conditions of 2022. That politics isn't washing anymore. We're heading into a recession where people simply won't be able to heat their homes, feed their family, and to not produce any policy, any programme, or give any idea of how to solve this crisis is absolutely bewildering. Someone kindly sent me the campaign strategy documents from Labour North yesterday. And I was looking through them, and I won't pull them up because there's no point. But they're nonsense. A series of graphs which identify types of voters, ages, demographics, etc., and how best to target these people. And, to my mind, you don't need a focus group to realise you need to stop people starving to death. You don't need a focus group to tell you to support workers. You don't need a focus group to tell you to let CLPs pick their own candidate. And you don't need a focus group to tell you to redistribute the enormous wealth held in Britain through taxation. You don't, whatever campaign strategy that is, but that's the policy platform that Labour Party should be running on. That's the policy platform which would win back seats in the Red Wall. And it struck me when I was writing this lead off that the politics we hold, are the only politics which will fix the immediate and long-term challenges in society. And not only that, it's my belief that the politics we hold are becoming mainstream politics. If you look at the industrial action with the RMT and the interviews with Mick Lynch and the public reaction to them. Now, there's nothing groundbreaking in what Mick Lynch is saying. It's common sense socialism. And, there's comrades in here who are older than I, but for my mind, I can't think of any set of industrial action which has garnered more sympathy and more support from the public than these rail strikes have taken over the last couple of months. Our politics is not only the right politics, but it's the politics which will get the party elected from the left, and it's the politics which will win back the Red Wall. and I want to say something on Starmer himself. I don't want to do a character assassination because I know it's not helpful, as satisfying as it can be. But what I would say is he could be the biggest dullard going, but as long as he had the right programme, we can work with it and we can put forward the correct policy in the correct position. The fact is he doesn't have the right programme. He's proven himself to be dishonest, and he is the worst person I've ever seen get interviewed. And the problem will be, whenever there's a general election, he'll be the face of the party. And I cringe when he speaks. He oozes insincerity, and whenever there's a remotely difficult question, he's like a deer in the headlights. And you could see, particularly during the Batley and Spen by-election, there was a concerted effort to not make him visible, because the party knows that he makes people not want to vote Labour. And the issue we'll have at the next general election is that he's going to be in the spotlight, doing debates, being asked questions that he can't answer, and performing absolutely abysmally. So can Labour win back the red wall? Yes, it can. Will it? I don't think so on current form. There's no evidence to suggest Labour has either the tools or the willingness to change to make any substantive gains. And I don't want to be fatalistic. And I'm normally when I do these lead-offs, I try and be optimistic and give some glimmer of hope. But there's really nothing to convince me that the party in its current form can win back the red wall seats. And I hope during the discussion people can change my mind and make me feel more optimistic. But with a couple of things I'll say before I conclude. And it's kind of like what's going to potentially happen between now and a general election. And the last lead-off I did, I said that there was, I believe there'd be a possibility that some trade unions will disaffiliate from the Labour Party. And I still believe that's a possibility. And I think the likelihood of that grows far stronger in light of recent events, namely the lack of support for some contemporary disputes, particularly Unite in Coventry. And I know Sharon Graham was pissed off with that, very pissed off. And, things like the sacking of Sam Tarry. And I know people disagree, and some people say, well, they won't disaffiliate, it'll never happen. But I really do think there's a possibility of that happening. But I personally don't think it would be a good thing. And I think trade unions should have a say in the Labour Party, but I think I believe that could happen. But what I think is more of a possibility, and may even border on a likelihood, is that there'll be a leadership challenge from the right of the party. I wrote an article for Left Horizons a year or so ago, and the starting point for that article was that Starmer had delivered on his promise to unite the party, in so much as both left and right think he's fucking useless. And that remains the case. And the right wing are brutal, and it's all about self-preservation. So they know he's useless. They know their seats will be in jeopardy if he's in charge. So I think there'll be a potential for someone on the right of the party to mount a challenge against Starmer, pretend to be left, and do the usual spiel. But I think that's a distinct possibility. And I'll finish on this point. And that point is, I think despite everything I've said, all the criticisms I've given of the Labour Party, we have to critically support the Labour Party, because the alternative to that is monstrous. And I haven't watched the Truss and Sunak debates, but I've seen clips. What we have in store, if another Conservative government is allowed to lead, is beyond the pale. We've got a widening of a racist deportation agenda. Trade union legislation being pulled back again, so we'll be in the same. I remember reading it was the same level as Russian trade union legislation. If these changes Sunak and Truss saying they'll put through are put through, and this is only a small point, but I was reading a bit this morning, and Sunak was saying he's going to be cracking down on degrees which don't improve earning potential. I mean, this stuff is bonkers. So as much as as you might have gathered from this lead-off, I'm not particularly a fan of the current Labour Party, despite being a member. As much as that's the case, the alternative, we're heading off the end of a cliff.